Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm a product manager on the Backup and Recovery Solutions product management team. Today, I'm going to talk about resilient ransomware protection with Oracle's Recovery Appliance. Ransomware is a new threat to business survival. There are over 4,000 ransomware attacks every day, according to the FBI. And on average, remediation costs over $1.5 million. And organizations have lost more than $7.5 billion in 2019. And worst of all, the average downtime from one of these attacks is 19 days. So if we look at the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency best practice for minimizing ransomware risk, I've got the link there at the bottom. You'll notice that the number one action is back up your data. You want to make sure that your data is protected and you have a recovery point to get back to in the event of a ransomware attack, because you want to make sure you're not in tomorrow's headline with your business down due to an attack. So let's talk about how ransomware penetrates your system and some of the concerns along the way. So, initially, the hacker is going to be able to try to set up command and control in your environment. They're going to be leveraging any attack vector that they can get their hands on. They're obviously going to try to get to credentials. They will use software methods. They'll use vulnerabilities. They will use, any kind of phishing email, and even down to social activity where phone calls are used. Anything that they can do to get into the environment or to learn more about your environment so that they can gain access. So you have to think about what are the processes and steps that are in place, and are they being followed? You have to consistently follow your policies and procedures to make sure that the hacker does not get access into your environment. And ideally, what they want is they want to get privileged access into your environment. Privileged access will give them the ability to move around more freely, to plant their ransomware software around in your infrastructure, because ultimately what they want to do is they want to get to your data. They want to manipulate your data. They even potentially want to access data and obtain it so they can use it for extortion purposes. So you need to make sure that you have backup and patch strategies and that they are being successfully executed on a regular basis, because it only takes one missing patch in your entire infrastructure to introduce a vulnerability, or it only takes one missing backup to provide a hole that's large enough so that you can't recover. And of course, while they're fishing around in your environment, they're also going to be looking for the backup infrastructure, because if they can disable the backup infrastructure while they disable everything else, that gives them the ultimate capability of having control in your environment and getting money out of you. If they miss any single piece that allows your business to continue to operate, while you can take the systems offline that are compromised, they failed, and they really, really want that payment. So the number one priority for the CIO is to make sure that you can recover in the event of one of these attacks. Okay, so let's talk about Oracle's layered defense and protection for ransomware. So I want to start by talking about the foundation. You need good backup and recovery for the Oracle database. The Recovery Appliance has a cyber vault architecture, which can be air vaulted so that you have a backup copy that is off the network. The Recovery Appliance also has transactional data protection, backup validation, and cyber resiliency built in. So, if you've got that good layer for backup and recovery, the Oracle database covered, you've got a fallback position, and that's kind of your foundation. Moving up the stack, TDE and security hardened Exadata infrastructure. You want your data to be encrypted and secure at all times, and the Exadata infrastructure provides a really great solution for that. Moving up the stack again, Oracle Audit Vault database firewall keeps these bad actors out of your Oracle database on the front end. And then, of course, user accounts, privileges, and role verification. That's key for your end users to make sure that the people who have access to your data are actually the right people to have access. In the end, you just don't want to pay the ransom. You want to be able to fully recover to a clean environment without data loss. And that's really the key, without data loss. So I'm going to focus on the recovery appliance and its capabilities today, because that's going to be your foundation for being able to recover without data loss. So let's dig into that. So the recovery appliance, one of its key capabilities for ransomware protection is being able to protect your database in real time. Every transaction that lands on the database is immediately protected by the recovery appliance. So that means if a ransomware attack occurs, you can go back to the transaction that happened immediately before that. Recovery assurance. Why do backups if you don't know that you can recover the database? The recovery appliance has some unique features that allow it to ensure that the backups that you're taking are ready for recovery. And then finally, separation of duty. Not everyone in your environment needs to have access, administrative access, especially to your backups. So you want to make sure that there's a separation of duty between the DBA and the backup infrastructure, so that a compromise in one layer does not allow compromises across the entire backup infrastructure. So let's go into each one of these in detail. Let's start with real-time database protection. So in a traditional backup paradigm, you have to think to yourself, how much data will I lose? And that's really what the question comes down to. So traditionally, you've got a weekly full backup, you have daily incrementals, and this process just continues. Next Sunday, you have a weekly full backup, and the following day, you have incrementals again. So daily incrementals, weekly full backups. And then you fill in the gaps with our hourly archived redo log backups. And you can adjust your archived redo log backup process to try to tighten the amount of data that'll be lost. Maybe you cut it down to 30 minutes, but you have to remember that that frequency of capturing the archive redo logs puts a lot of strain on your database. And your database, really, you want that to be doing business operations, not purely being tuned for backup. And this process just continues: weekly full, daily incrementals, hourly, maybe half hour archived redo logs. But if there's a loss, if there's a data compromise, you could lose up to an hour of data because you're not protecting the Oracle database on any more frequently than that. So now if we look at the recovery appliance and the backup paradigm, you have your one-time full, that's normal. You're still doing your daily incrementals, that's normal. But now the data that is being protected from the database is happening in real time. So there's a real-time redo protection being submitted or being transferred over to the recovery appliance. So now, if there's a compromise, you've got protection to the very last transaction that occurred in the database. So think about how powerful that is. Ransomware attack occurs, you back up to the transaction that occurred the moment before the transaction where the ransomware infiltrated the system. So very, very powerful. Now let's look at recovery assurance, because you're capturing all this data. You want to make sure that it's actually ready for recovery. So let's look at the traditional backup solution again as a comparison. Unfortunately, traditional backup solutions have really no idea what represents a recoverable backup. They don't understand if a backup piece is missing. If your Sunday full is missing, that means all your backups through the week, Monday through Saturday, are useless. You can't use an incremental backup alone to recover your database. It doesn't recognize corrupt backups. So if there's a corruption in a piece somewhere along the way, that can wreak havoc on your recovery capabilities. So you want to, it's crucial to be able to recognize any kind of corruption that's occurred. And then finally, if someone has gotten into your infrastructure, a bad actor, it's very difficult for a traditional backup solution to understand that tampering has occurred. They could delete backups, they could corrupt backups, and that tampering will leave you incapable of recovering the database. So you really end up with an unknown database recoverability, and that's a very dangerous place to be in the case of a ransomware attack. So now again, let's compare that to the recovery appliance. So the recovery appliance understands all the pieces that are required to do the backup. So if a piece disappears, if a piece is corrupt, it knows that that piece is necessary to be able to recover to all the points in time that you've specified in your policy that's protecting the database. And it also understands how to validate the backups. So it understands that, yes, not only does the piece exist, the piece is actually good. So the backup piece for the database is actually good because the recovery appliance knows how to validate the data because it has a deep understanding of what Oracle data looks like from the database. And then if someone attempts to tamper with the backup, the recovery appliance is also keenly aware of that because it understands how to validate the data and how to understand if tampering has occurred. And to give you the confidence that all this is happening, we have real-time and scheduled reports that show this compliance to ensure that all the backups are good. They cover the window that you've specified in your policy. So the recovery appliance has very rich reporting to let you know that this happens. So now all your backups are validated and ready for recovery. And of course, speaking of recovery, how fast can you restore your database? Traditional backup methods, can take a long time and it's really unpredictable. So let's say we want to restore to Friday at 2:34 p.m. That means first you have to restore the weekly full, then you have to restore all the daily incremental backups. And that's a serial process. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all of those backups have to be restored. Then you have to restore your archived redo log backups up to 2:34 p.m. So there's a lot of processing that happens. And as I mentioned before, if there's a piece that's missing or a piece that's corrupt, this entire process falls apart. So unfortunately, the restore time is a little bit unpredictable because it depends on how far away you are from the full, how big were your incrementals, how long will they take to process, and then how many archived redo logs do you have to process to actually recover your database. Now, if we look at that same paradigm again with the comparison with the recovery appliance, it's a much more simple, fast, and predictable restore. And that's purely because every backup that comes into the recovery appliance becomes a virtual full. So every incremental database backup becomes a virtual full. So now, if we look at that Friday at 2:34 p.m. restore, you can simply start from Friday. You restore the Friday virtual full, then you restore the archived redo logs that get you up to that point in time. Much more predictable and much faster and very simple. Like, when every backup is a full that you can start with, it's a much more simple process, less pieces to deal with and less to process. The recovery appliance also has a very predictable restore performance of up to 24 terabytes per hour for a full rack of the recovery appliance. So, if you know your database size and how much data is being protected, which the recovery appliance easily shows in the reporting, you know how long it's going to take you to restore because we have this very predictable restore performance. So in the end, your restore time is very predictable. Makes your job very easy, and it's not so much of a panic if there is a ransomware attack. So let's look at the separation of duty model with the recovery appliance. So first, there's the DBA. The DBA obviously is sending and retrieving backups from the recovery appliance. They do that via RMAN, very known utility for them, very simple, straightforward, and most DBAs have been using RMAN for years, the Oracle Recovery Manager. The next role is the recovery appliance administrator. They're administering the recovery appliance and the policies that are associated with protecting the database. They don't have any access to the database, so they can't tamper with production databases. The DBA can't tamper with any of the policies that are controlling retention in the recovery appliance. And then finally, if you go with an air gap solution to even provide more functionality and more security, you can apply a different set of credentials to that infrastructure. So now there's a third person. So you have two copies of your backup, each being controlled through an administrative process that's separate from one another. Different policies controlled by different people that control the overall retention of the backups. And each backup is being validated, and you get compliance reports from both. And now if we zoom out and talk about all the pieces, you've got Oracle databases being protected in real time to the recovery appliance. The recovery appliance then can send data off to an air gap location in the cyber vault. There's end-to-end recovery validation and compliance reporting. The recovery appliance itself is a hardened compute and storage architecture. It's specifically designed for backup and recovery of the Oracle database, and has a very minimal footprint to do that. The recovery appliance can also send data off to Oracle public cloud storage if you need an offsite storage location, as well as sending data to tape or an on-premises ZFS-based object storage. And all of this is compatible with TDE. So if you're going to be talking about, ransomware protection and security in your environment, you need to be thinking about Oracle's, TDE encryption for the database itself. And all of the concepts that I've been talking about, real-time protection, validation, is fully compatible with TDE with the recovery appliance. So a summary. First, ransomware breaches can be devastating. There's a material impact on revenue and trust within your organization, and they're increasing in frequency and complexity. So it's becoming more and more difficult to keep some of these bad actors out of your environment. Two, modern problems like ransomware require modern data protection. Relying on traditional methods is really problematic. You want to make sure your data is secure, that you know that the backups you have are validated and there's integrity in that. And then, of course, you got to have that data available. And that is all critical for your overall protection strategy of the Oracle database. And finally, the recovery appliance is the world's best Oracle database protection. We've got zero data loss capabilities, the capability of doing backup data validation, there's role-based administration, and much, much more. And all of this, of course, is possible because of the deep automated integration with the Oracle database. I thank you so much for taking your time today. I've got a few additional resources here that you can get more information from the backup and recovery office hours. There's a database security office hours. There's a cybersecurity blog that you can read read in detail about the recovery appliance's capabilities. And then, of course, there's a cyber security technical paper that covers the recovery appliance in detail so you can understand exactly what's happening from a technical perspective. Thank you so much for your time today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.